I never planned on running the family business. My old man, a brilliant yet stubborn chemist, built up our pharmaceutical company from scratch. Started in a cramped garage with nothing but grit and a vision. Over the years, he carved out a small space in the market, focusing on rare but essential medications. It wasn't a flashy business, and while it made steady profits, it never hit it big. Dad didn't seem to care much for making millions. He was all about the work. When he passed, the company fell into my hands and my two sisters. Keeping it alive wasn't just about the legal obligation, it felt like something more, like honoring the blood, sweat, and tears Dad had poured into it. I worked hard to juggle that responsibility and still be present for my family. My wife, Emily, had been by my side for over 2 decades, staying home to raise our twin daughters, Grace and Hannah. They were both juniors at Duke University now, and man, that tuition was brutal. But I kept things afloat, even as the pressure slowly grew heavier. Lately, though, the walls had been closing in. The company was stuck, unable to compete with the corporate giants swallowing up the industry. And at home, things with Emily were different, distant. The spark had dimmed. Conversations that used to be full of life were now just passing exchanges. The passion we once had was fading, replaced by quiet routines. With the girls out of the house and the business dragging me down, I knew something had to give. Then came the offer. A major pharmaceutical company wanted to buy us out. It wasn't just some passing interest, they were serious. The offer made perfect sense, more sense than dragging the company through the mud for a few more years. The sale would land me over $10 million and a well-paid transition role for a couple of years. For the first time in a long while, I could see a future that didn't involve endless stress. A future of freedom. I pictured Emily and me traveling, living comfortably, maybe even rekindling what we'd lost. First-class flights, weekend getaways, it all seemed within reach. I just wrapped up the final negotiations in New York. The ink was dry, and the lawyers were handling the last of the paperwork. I was done. All I wanted was to get home and tell Emily that everything was about to change for the better. I found myself at a busy airport bar in JFK, nursing my second gin and tonic while watching the endless parade of travelers heading to their gates. I was third on the wait list for the last flight back to Charlotte, and it wasn't looking promising. Still, I hadn't called Emily. I couldn't explain why. Maybe I wanted to surprise her. Maybe I didn't know what to say. Then, out of nowhere, luck found me. A group of 4 passengers missed their check-in, and the gate agent called my name. I tossed some cash on the bar, grabbed my briefcase and duffel, and hurried to the gate. First class, no less. For the first time that day, I smiled. Maybe this was a sign that everything was finally turning around. As the plane rolled toward the runway, the flight attendant leaned in. "Would you like something to drink before takeoff?" I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, another gin and tonic." I finished it fast and let the hum of the engines lull me to sleep. My mind drifted to the conversation I'd have with Emily, how I'd tell her the company was sold, how we could finally breathe, finally live. But none of that happened. The rough jolt of the plane landing woke me up. Groggy, still buzzing from the drinks, I made my way through the terminal and flagged down a taxi. It was late, too late to call Emily. I figured I'd let her sleep and surprise her in the morning. We lived just a few miles outside Charlotte, tucked away in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. As I leaned back in the cab, half asleep, I imagined how relieved Emily would be when she heard the news. But that moment never came. As the taxi rolled into the driveway, something caught my eye. A gold Mercedes, parked right in front of the garage, my side of the garage. It wasn't a car I recognized. Expensive, stylish. Not Emily's taste. I froze. Emily hadn't mentioned anyone stopping by. We had spoken around noon that day, and she hadn't said a word about having company. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the car, my mind scrambling for explanations. Maybe it was a friend's car. Maybe her cousin was visiting. Maybe. But the darker thoughts crept in, uninvited. I shook them off and quietly let myself in through the door between the garage and the kitchen. The house was dark. Too dark. I moved cautiously, every creak of the floorboards louder than usual. Upstairs, the bedroom door was half open. Nothing seemed out of place. But something was. I pushed the door open, and my world shattered. Emily was asleep, completely unclothed, tangled up in bed with another man. His arm was thrown casually over her, a smug little smile on his face. They were both breathing softly, snoring in sync. Emily's soft snoring had always comforted me. It was like a lullaby, a reminder that I was safe, that we were safe. But now, it was a cruel reminder of what I'd lost. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I stood there, frozen. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Eventually, my brain started working again. I looked around the room and spotted the man's clothes neatly folded on the chair I'd sat in countless times. Something inside me snapped. I could have grabbed the tennis racket from the closet. I could have woken them up and let my rage take over. But I didn't. Instead, I reached for my phone, clicked a few photos. Proof. Not for revenge. For the divorce. I moved quietly, gathering every piece of the man's clothing. His shirt, pants, shoes. Before I left, I looked at Emily one last time, and something inside me turned off. Whatever love I had for her was buried under the weight of her cheating. I left the room in silence. Downstairs, I found the key fob to the Mercedes. A quiet beep unlocked the car. I tossed my bags in the trunk, slid behind the wheel, and started the engine. I'd never cared for flashy cars, but as I drove off, I had to admit it felt good. A few miles down the road, I pulled over and opened the guy's wallet. Franklin Carter, senior sales manager at a local Mercedes dealership. Charlotte address. Of course, Emily was cheating with a car salesman. But it wasn't just the cheating. It was that she brought him here, to our home, to our bed. My sanctuary was gone. I wasn't ready to face Emily. Not yet. I needed time to think. I checked into a cheap motel, paid in cash, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the bed, staring at the wall. I thought about Emily, about Grace and Hannah, about everything I had built. But no matter how many ways I tried to twist it, one thing was clear. My marriage was over. Morning sunlight slipped through the thin motel curtains, casting a dull glow over the cramped, musty room. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, fully dressed but frozen in place. My eyes were locked on the open wallet resting on the nightstand. Franklin Carter. His ID stared back at me, accusing me without saying a word. I hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw Emily wrapped up in our bed with him. Our bed. That's what stung the most. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the complete disregard for everything we had built. That room used to be our safe place, where we laughed, argued, and made up. Now it felt violated, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I rubbed my temples, trying to ease the pounding headache that was starting to form. The gin from last night hadn't helped. Neither had the rage boiling in my chest. Now, with the morning light shining in, everything felt heavier, more real. I was supposed to come home with good news. The sale of the company was going to change our lives. But instead, it marked the end of my marriage. Leaning back against the headboard, I stared blankly at the ceiling. What was I supposed to do next? I could confront Emily, but what would that solve? Would yelling at her fix anything? Probably not. Then my thoughts drifted to Grace and Hannah. How was I going to tell them their mother cheated on me? The idea of breaking that news to them made me feel sick. Suddenly, my phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand, making me jump. It was Sheila, my assistant. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. Yeah. My voice came out rough and drained. Mr. Harper? Oh, thank God. I was starting to get worried. I called you last night, but you didn't pick up. Are you okay? Sheila's voice was filled with concern. I'm fine. I lied, trying to steady my voice. Caught a flight back late. Just needed to clear my head. She paused for a moment. Sheila wasn't dumb. She could tell something was off, but she didn't press. Well, I just wanted to give you an update. The lawyers confirmed the paperwork is nearly done. The deal should close by the end of next week. Congratulations, Mr. Harper. This is a huge step. Yeah, thanks. Have you told Emily yet? I'm sure she'll be thrilled. I closed my eyes and pinched the bridge of my nose. Just hearing her name made my stomach turn. I haven't told her yet, I muttered. Oh, well, I'm sure she'll be happy when you do. I'll be at the office if you need anything. Thanks, Sheila. I'll call later. I ended the call and let the phone drop onto the bed. Emily doesn't deserve to hear it from me, I thought. None of it mattered now. $10 million couldn't patch up what was broken. I stood up and grabbed Franklin's wallet again, flipping through it mindlessly. Credit cards, a few crumpled bills, business cards from the dealership. Then I saw his address. A nice neighborhood, based on the zip code. Figures. Guys like Franklin had to keep up appearances. I tightened my grip on the wallet. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed the Mercedes key fob, my briefcase, and walked out of the motel. The Mercedes glided smoothly as I drove toward Franklin's house. The engine purred, but I barely noticed. My head was spinning with thoughts of what I'd do when I got there. I wasn't the kind of guy to start a fight, but I couldn't lie. The thought of facing Franklin, staring him down, was tempting. I pulled into his neighborhood, all neatly trimmed lawns and perfectly painted houses. Money. His house was no different. A small bike leaned against the garage door. Franklin had kids. Of course, he did. I sat in the car for a minute, staring at the house. Without thinking, I grabbed the wallet and marched up to the front door. My finger hovered over the doorbell before I finally pressed it. The door opened, and a woman appeared. Maybe late 20s. She was pretty but looked exhausted. Messy bun, oversized t-shirt, yoga pants. Yes? She asked cautiously, eyeing me. I held up Franklin's ID. This your husband? Her eyes flicked from the wallet to me, then to the Mercedes in the driveway. She paled. What is this? Who are you? My name's Jack Harper. Your husband is sleeping with my wife. The words felt like poison leaving my mouth. Her face tightened, and without a word, she slammed the door in my face. I blinked, stunned for a second. I turned to leave, but the door creaked open again. This time, she was holding her phone. I've got 911 ready to go. Start explaining. I let out a sigh. I was too drained to play games. I've got photos of your husband. In my bed. With my wife. Go ahead and call the cops if you want. I'll be out here sitting in his car. Her hand trembled on the phone. She stared at me, like she was trying to figure out if I was bluffing. Then, slowly, she stepped aside. Come in. I followed her into the house. It was nice, cozy. Family pictures on the walls. Kids' toys scattered on the floor. She gestured to the couch. Sit. I need to get the kids ready for school. I sat down and placed Franklin's wallet on the coffee table. She disappeared down the hall, and I could hear kids' voices in the background. When she returned, she handed me a cup of coffee. I'm Rachel, she said flatly. Franklin's wife. So, start talking. I told her everything. From coming home early to what I saw in the bedroom. I left out the part about driving off in Franklin's car, but I gave her enough to understand the cheat. Rachel didn't say anything for a long time. Then she let out a slow breath. I should have seen this coming. He's been distant for months. I figured it was work stress. Guess not. Her voice cracked, but she quickly pulled herself together. So, what are you gonna do? I'm divorcing Emily. That's for sure. I thought you should know what your husband's been up to. Rachel was quiet for a while. Then she chuckled bitterly. Well, that explains a lot. Franklin's not here, is he? No. Good. He can stay gone. You keep the car for now. It's in my name anyway. If the cops stop you, just tell them to call me. I raised an eyebrow. Seriously? Oh, dead serious. Let him sweat. He can explain why his car is missing when he decides to crawl home. I nodded. I hadn't expected to find someone like Rachel in all this mess, but I appreciated how calm and sharp she was. Thanks. Don't thank me. Just make sure he regrets it. I stood to leave. Oh, and Jack, she called after me. If you decide to ruin him, let me know. I'll want front row seats. I managed a small smile. You'll be the first to know. Driving away, something in me shifted. The pain was still there, deep and sharp, but now it had direction. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about taking control back. I drove aimlessly through the winding streets of Charlotte, the gold Mercedes gliding smoothly beneath me. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows on the road and slowly warming the crisp air. But none of it registered. The hum of the engine was distant, almost like I was watching my life play out from somewhere far away. I had no idea what my next move was. Should I confront Emily? Just walk away? Did I even need to hear her excuses? Or was the truth already too obvious? My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. I need answers, I told myself. There was only one person who might help me sort this mess out. Tom Barrett, my family's longtime lawyer and advisor. Tom had been a rock through tough times, always level-headed and fiercely loyal to me and my sisters. If anyone could guide me through the storm, it was him. Tom's office sat in a modest brick building downtown, tucked between sleeker, newer offices. It wasn't flashy, but that was Tom's way. Efficient, no nonsense. I parked the Mercedes a few blocks away, not wanting to draw attention, and made my way to the entrance. His assistant, Linda, greeted me with a polite but curious smile. "Mr. Harper, I wasn't expecting you today. Is Tom in?" My voice was steady, but I could tell Linda sensed something was off. "He's finishing up a call. Please, have a seat, and I'll let him know you're here." I didn't sit. Instead, I paced the small lobby until the office door creaked open. Tom appeared, his silver hair neatly combed, his sharp eyes studying me carefully. His face shifted from casual professionalism to concern. "Jack, you look like hell. Come on in." I followed him inside, the door clicking shut behind me. Tom gestured toward a chair. "Sit down. Tell me what's going on." I collapsed into the seat, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. "I need a divorce lawyer." Tom didn't flinch. He simply leaned back, steepling his fingers. "What happened?" I hesitated for a second, then the words poured out. I told him everything. From the late flight home to finding that gold Mercedes in my driveway, to walking into my bedroom and seeing Emily tangled up with another man. Tom listened in silence, his face impossible to read. When I finished, the air in the room felt heavier. Tom finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Jack. That's rough. But you're right to act quickly. Do you want me to handle this? Or do you want someone who deals with this kind of thing every day? Someone who specializes. I want it done fast and clean. And I want to make sure the money from the company sale is safe." Tom nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll connect you with Lisa Grant. She's one of the best in family law, tough and discreet. I'll call her right now." He picked up the phone and dialed without hesitation. I glanced around his office, my eyes landing on a framed photo on his desk. It was Tom's family smiling together. It reminded me of an old picture of Emily and me, holding Grace and Hannah when they were little. That life felt like a lifetime ago. Tom hung up the phone. "Lisa can see you this afternoon. I'll text you her office address." I gave him a nod. "Jack," Tom said, leaning forward. "This feels like the end, but you need to stay sharp. Divorce isn't just emotional. It's strategic. Keep your head clear." "I will." "Thanks, Tom." As I stood, he gave me a thoughtful look. "Oh, and Jack." "Yeah." A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Next time, maybe don't drive around in the other guy's car." I paused, then let out a bitter laugh. "Good point." Meanwhile, Emily sat at our kitchen table, staring at her phone. She called me twice that morning, each time getting my voicemail. Her stomach was in knots. Why isn't he answering? She tried to reason with herself. Maybe I was still in New York. Maybe I was busy. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Her mind flashed back to the night before. Franklin panicking when he realized his car and clothes were missing. Emily had tried to stay calm, but when Franklin suggested that maybe I had come home early, her heart nearly stopped. If I had come home and seen them, she couldn't finish the thought. Her phone buzzed in her hand. It was Linda. Emily snatched it up. "Linda." "Hi, Emily. I just wanted to let you know Jack left New York late last night. I haven't heard from him this morning, but I thought you should know." Emily's breath caught in her throat. He left last night? Are you sure? Yes. He was trying to catch the last flight back to Charlotte. Emily's hand trembled. Thanks, Linda. I appreciate it. She ended the call and stared blankly at the kitchen wall. I had been home. I knew. That afternoon, I sat in Lisa Grant's office, feeling the full weight of my situation. Lisa was in her early 50s, sharp and confident, with a no-nonsense attitude. Tom was right. She was exactly the kind of lawyer I needed. She listened carefully as I laid everything out. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Well, Jack, the good news is that the proceeds from selling your company are safe. Since you inherited the business before your marriage, that money is yours, as long as it stays separate from joint accounts. I nodded. And the bad news? Lisa sighed. The house, joint savings, and retirement accounts are marital property. Given your income, you'll probably owe alimony. But since your daughters are grown, there's no child support. We can work to protect your future earnings, but it won't be painless. I let out a slow breath. I don't care about the house. Sell it. She can take whatever she wants. I'm done. Lisa nodded. I'll draft the divorce petition today. Emily will be served tomorrow. After that, we can start talking settlements. Until then, stay away from her. No confrontations. Understood. As I got up to leave, Lisa's tone softened. Jack, I know this is hard, but divorce can turn people into their worst selves. Stay calm. Let me fight this battle for you. I gave a small, tired smile. I'm not interested in fighting her. I just want this over. Emily paced the living room, unable to sit still. Her phone buzzed. A text. Center Cafe. 6 p.m. Don't be late. It was from me. Her heart pounded. The Center Cafe. That's where we had our first date. Was this a sign I wanted to talk things through? Maybe there was hope. But deep down, she feared the truth. That this meeting wasn't about fixing anything. It was about saying goodbye. Emily glanced at the clock. The minutes crawled by, each one heavier than the last. Please, Jack, she thought. Give me a chance to explain. But I didn't want an explanation. I wanted closure. The Center Cafe hadn't changed over the years. Its warm lighting and cozy booths once set the stage for Emily and me to fall in love. But now, it felt cold and distant, like a reminder of something long gone. I sat in a corner booth, the same spot where we used to dream about the future. Now silence was all we had left. I watched the door until Emily finally walked in. She looked smaller. Slouched posture, pale face, hair hastily tied back. No makeup. I didn't bother standing up. Jack? Her voice was weak. I motioned to the seat across from me. Sit. She slowly lowered herself into the booth, like she was afraid the moment would crush her. We sat in silence for a while. Then I spoke. Do you know what time I got home last night? Emily's hands shook. No. I didn't know you were coming back early. Do you know what I saw upstairs? She didn't respond. You didn't even bother locking the bedroom door. Her eyes filled with tears. Jack, please. No, my tone cut her off. You don't get to speak yet. She flinched. I leaned in. How many men have there been? Her face went pale. Don't lie to me. How many? She stared at the table. 3, she whispered. I wasn't shocked. 3, I repeated, my voice flat. Was Franklin the last one? Or just the dumbest? She shook, barely holding it together. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was a mistake. I shook my head slowly. No, cheating isn't a mistake. It's a choice. She covered her face, sobbing. I just watched. I saw a divorce lawyer today, I said calmly. Emily's head snapped up. No, Jack, please. We can fix this. Fix this. I let out a bitter laugh. No, this can't be fixed. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. You'll be served with divorce papers tomorrow. Get a lawyer. Her breathing quickened. Jack, I love you. I swear I was going to end it with Franklin. My face hardened. You ended it the second I saw you in our bed. Her sobs got louder. People were starting to stare. I stood up, tossed some bills on the table. This is over, Emily. I walked out, leaving her behind. Outside, the cold air hit me. I didn't know if I felt relief or more pain. Maybe both. I slid into the Mercedes, gripping the steering wheel. My phone buzzed. Rachel, he's home. Got arrested breaking in. Karma's fast. I smirked. Me good. Let him sit with that. I tossed the phone aside and started the car. I didn't go home. Couldn't. Instead, I checked into a better hotel. Tomorrow it would all be official. Emily sat in the cafe, crushed by my words. Divorce. She thought she was in control, that Franklin was just a distraction. But now she had destroyed everything. Grace, Hannah, they would find out. Emily buried her face in her hands and sobbed. The next morning I woke up early. I needed to tell my daughters before anyone else did. I called Grace. Hey, Dad. Grace. Can you and Hannah meet me for brunch? Sure. Is everything okay? No. But I need to talk to you both. They met me at the bistro. Their smiles faded when they saw my face. I didn't waste time. Your mother and I are getting a divorce. Grace gasped. Hannah turned pale. What? Grace whispered. She cheated on me. Silence. Dad, are you serious? I'm sorry, but I wanted you to hear it from me. Hannah's voice shook. Are you okay? I will be, but I need you two to stay focused on school. Let me handle the rest. They sat there stunned. Finally, Grace reached for my hand. We're with you, Dad. Hannah nodded, wiping tears. We'll get through this. A lump rose in my throat. I love you both, no matter what. For the first time in days, I felt a sliver of peace. Later that day, Emily sat alone in the house that no longer felt like home. The doorbell rang. A woman handed her an envelope. You've been served. Emily stared at the divorce papers, her hands shaking. Her marriage was over. Her family was broken, and she had no one to blame but herself. Emily sat alone at the kitchen table. Divorce papers spread out in front of her like the wreckage of a storm. Every page felt heavier than the last. Each word a harsh reminder that the life she had built with Jack was gone. The legal jargon blurred together, but the meaning was unmistakable. This was final. Her fingers traced Jack's signature at the bottom of the petition. She wondered what he had felt when he signed it. Was it anger? Sadness? Or maybe nothing at all? The cold, mechanical way she had been served told her everything. Jack wasn't interested in apologies or explanations. This wasn't a conversation. It was closure. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her spiral. It was Grace. Emily hesitated, staring at the screen. Do they know? Did Jack tell them? Slowly, she answered. Mom. Grace's voice was distant, colder than usual. Grace, hi. Is everything okay? Emily's voice cracked despite her effort to sound calm. No, not really. Emily's stomach turned. Dad told us. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Oh, Emily's voice wavered. I was going to tell you, Don't, Mom. Grace cut her off, sharp and to the point. You cheated on Dad. What more is there to say? Emily's throat tightened. I made mistakes, but it's more complicated than that. Please, let me explain. Grace's voice was cold. No, it's not. You broke this family. Grace, please. We're staying out of it. But don't think things will ever be normal again. Joan feels the same. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. I love you both. I hope you can forgive me one day. There was a pause. Then Grace's tone softened. Just a little. We need time, Mom. A lot of it. And then the line went dead. Emily sat in the suffocating silence, crushed by the weight of what she had done. Across town, I sat in Lisa Grant's office, listening as she laid out the next steps. Lisa was calm, collected, but didn't sugarcoat anything. Emily may push back on the alimony, but with the evidence you have, it's unlikely she'll fight too hard. I nodded. I don't want this dragging out. I just want it over. Lisa leaned forward. You have options. We can sell the house and split the profits, or you could buy out her share. Sell it, I said without hesitation. I don't want anything to do with that house. She made a note in her file. And the girls. They're adults. I'll take care of their tuition and living expenses. Emily doesn't need to be involved. Lisa glanced up. You're handling this better than most. I let out a hollow laugh. I don't feel like I'm handling anything. She closed the file. Give it time. You're making the right moves. Let me handle the legal side. You focus on moving forward. Moving forward. The words echoed in my head as I left the office. But forward to where? Franklin Carter stared blankly at the cracks in the wall of the police station. The cold bite of the handcuffs dug into his wrists. How the hell did it get to this? Smashing the window to his own house wasn't his best moment. The alarm went off, and the cops swarmed him within minutes. Molly hadn't answered any of his calls. His brother bailed him out, but not without tearing into him. You're a damn fool, Franklin. Now, sitting alone in the station, he knew things were worse than a night behind bars. Molly was done. Max had his car. And his job at the dealership? Hanging by a thread. His phone buzzed. A text from Molly. Molly, don't come back. I'm filing for separation. The kids don't need to see you. Franklin let out a dry, bitter laugh. Guess I deserve that. I found myself driving to the park where I used to take Grace and Hannah when they were little. The gold Mercedes looked out of place among the SUVs and minivans. I parked and got out, letting the cold air hit me. A jogger passed by, earbuds in, lost in his own world. I envied him for a second. Running seemed easy, just forward motion, no past weighing you down. I sat on a bench and stared at the empty playground. My phone buzzed. It was Molly. Molly. So, what's next? You still got my car? I smirked. Me, yeah. You want it back? Molly, not yet. But Franklin sure as hell isn't getting it. Keep it as long as you need. I stared at the screen for a moment. Me, thanks. You holding up? A pause. Molly, better than Franklin. I chuckled softly. At least someone else understood this mess. Emily sat in the dimly lit living room, gripping a half-empty glass of wine. She hadn't slept. Her mind kept replaying every decision that led to this. Franklin had been exciting, confident, charming. He knew exactly how to make her feel wanted again. But that excitement faded, replaced by guilt. Jack had always been steady, reliable. Maybe too steady. Emily hated herself for wanting more. And now she had nothing. No husband. No daughters. Her eyes drifted to the divorce papers again. Cold. Final. There was no fixing this. Only surviving. And she wasn't sure she could. I sat quietly, watching the sky shift from blue to gray. For the first time in days, I let myself feel it all. But it wasn't just pain anymore. It was clarity. The life I had was gone. But that meant I could build something new. I didn't know what that would look like yet. But for now, it started with letting go. I sat in the gold Mercedes, staring blankly at the dashboard. The steady hum of the engine felt distant, a dull contrast to the chaos swirling in my head. The park around me was nearly empty now, just a few joggers and parents pushing strollers. I told Grace and Hannah the truth. I'd handed Emily the divorce papers. Now, with the adrenaline gone, all that remained was a crushing sense of finality. What now? That question echoed in my mind. I wasn't a man who usually felt lost. My whole life had been about responsibility, running the family business, holding my marriage together, raising 2 daughters. I had always been busy holding things in place, meeting everyone's expectations. But now all of that was gone. My marriage was over. The company was sold. My daughters were grown and didn't need me like they used to. For the first time in my life, I wasn't anchored to anything. And it scared the hell out of me. Emily sat at the kitchen table, the divorce papers untouched beside her. Hours had passed, and she hadn't moved, staring into nothing as the house darkened around her. She felt numb. Earlier, she tried calling me again. No answer. Grace and Hannah had cut her off. Franklin, he wasn't an option anymore. She didn't even want to hear his name. She was completely alone. Emily wasn't used to being alone. I had always been there, solid, dependable. Even when we grew distant, I was still her foundation. Now that foundation was gone. Her phone buzzed. It was Franklin. She stared at the screen, disgust rising in her throat. The last person she wanted to hear from. She let it ring until it stopped. But the silence that followed felt even heavier. Franklin Carter lay on the lumpy couch in his brother's guest room, staring at the cracked ceiling. His life had fallen apart in less than a day. Molly had locked him out. His affair with Emily had blown up, and I had humiliated him without saying a word. Now his job at the dealership was slipping away. People were already whispering about his arrest. He grabbed his phone and hovered over Emily's name, but he didn't call. She wouldn't answer. Nobody would. Franklin closed his eyes, letting out a slow breath. He used to think he was the one in control. Now he was nothing. How did I lose everything so fast? I drove aimlessly through Charlotte, the city lights blending into a blur. I thought about going home, but the thought made my skin crawl. That house wasn't home anymore. It was a graveyard of memories. Every room carried the weight of Emily's cheating. But the bedroom was the worst. The image of her and Franklin in our bed burned behind my eyes. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. I can't go back there. I pulled into a hotel parking lot, deciding to stay another night away. The room was plain, sterile, but it was better than being surrounded by ghosts. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the dark window. Who are you now? I didn't have an answer. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before throwing the covers off. Enough. I couldn't keep sitting in this limbo. If I didn't move forward, I'd drown in this. I grabbed my phone and called Fred Thomas. He answered right away. Max, how are you holding up? I need to talk. Fred didn't hesitate. My office. Come by whenever you're ready. I didn't waste any time. Fred was waiting for me, leaning back in his office chair with a cup of coffee. He motioned for me to sit. I dropped into the chair, rubbing my face. I need to figure out what comes next. Fred gave a slow nod. You've already done the hardest part. You've filed for divorce. You've told your girls. Now it's about moving forward. That's the problem, Fred. I don't know how to move forward. My whole life's been about holding things together. Now, I've got nothing left to hold on to. Fred set his coffee down and leaned in. You've got more than you think. You're not broke. You're not stuck. You can start fresh. I scoffed. Start fresh with what? My marriage is dead. The company's gone. Fred's eyes narrowed. That's exactly why this is your chance. You've got money, time, and no one to answer to. Most guys would kill for that. You need to figure out what you want your life to look like. I stayed quiet. I don't even know where to begin. Fred smirked. Then figure it out. Go somewhere. Clear your head. I thought about it. I'd only ever traveled for work. Never for myself. Maybe Fred was right. Maybe it was time to leave Charlotte for a while. Emily sat in her lawyer's office, barely hearing a word. Lisa Carter, her attorney, flipped through the divorce papers. Camila, Max is offering a fair split of the house and assets. He's covering the girls' education. No child support, obviously. Emily didn't react. Lisa cleared her throat. We could fight the alimony terms, but given the situation, I don't advise it. Emily shook her head slowly. No, I'm not fighting it. Lisa nodded. Then all that's left is to sign. Emily stared at the pen in front of her. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. She signed. Each stroke of the pen pushed her marriage further into the past. I sat at the park again, but this time I wasn't stuck in my thoughts. I had made a decision. I was leaving Charlotte. Not forever, but for now. I needed space. Space from Emily, from the memories, from everything. I pulled out my phone and searched for flights. Anywhere far away. My finger hovered over a flight to Denver. Mountains. Solitude. I booked it. I exhaled slowly. For the first time in days, I felt lighter. I wasn't running away. I was starting over. And for once, that thought didn't scare me. I had a flight to Denver booked for the next morning, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a flicker of relief. Not happiness, not even close, but something lighter. like I could finally breathe after suffocating for days. Sitting in the quiet hotel room, the steady hum of the air conditioner filled the space. My mind kept drifting back to everything I was leaving behind. Charlotte, the house, the life I built with Emily. But mostly I thought about them. Emily and Franklin. That image of them tangled up in our bed played on repeat in my head. I didn't know if it would ever stop. Maybe it wouldn't, but putting some miles between me and that house, maybe that could dull the edges. I picked up my phone and stared at Grace and Hannah's names. Should I call them before I go? No, not yet. They had enough to deal with already. I'll check in when I land. I set the phone down and leaned back against the bed. And for the first time in days, I let exhaustion pull me under. Emily barely slept that night. The house felt suffocatingly quiet, the silence closing in on her. She drifted from room to room, each space a painful reminder of what was gone. The kitchen, where I used to make breakfast on Sunday mornings. The living room, where we'd curl up and watch old movies. And the bedroom, the place she ruined. She couldn't even bring herself to open that door. Instead, she just stood there, staring at it like it might open on its own and undo everything. But it didn't. It stayed closed, cold, silent. She poured herself a glass of wine she didn't want and sat on the couch, staring at her phone. No calls, no texts, not from me, not from Grace or Hannah. Her family had gone silent, and she was left sitting in the wreckage she created. She thought about calling Franklin, but the thought made her sick. He wasn't comfort. He was the mistake that ended everything. And now she had nothing. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel and drove the gold Mercedes back to Molly's house. She opened the door in sweatpants, cradling a mug of coffee. Her eyes flicked to the car in the driveway. "Finally giving it back?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I smirked. "Figured you might need it more than me." Molly crossed her arms. "Franklin's never getting behind that wheel again. I don't care if he has to hitchhike to work. He might not have a job to go to," I said flatly. Molly let out a dry laugh. "Good. He deserves it." I held out the keys. "I'm leaving town for a while. Thought I'd drop this off before I go." She studied me for a second. "Leaving, huh? Running or starting over?" I paused. "Maybe both." She nodded slowly. "Well, wherever you're headed, I hope you find some peace. We both could use it." "Yeah." I chuckled lightly. "Take care of yourself, Molly." "You too, Jack." I turned to leave but stopped. "Oh, and if Franklin comes asking about the car, tell him to go to hell." Molly smirked. "Don't worry. I planned on it." The airport was packed, but I barely noticed. I moved through security on autopilot, boarded the plane without making eye contact with anyone. As the plane lifted off, Charlotte grew smaller beneath me. And for the first time, I let myself believe I was leaving more than just a city. I was leaving behind the weight of Emily's cheating, the anger, the resentment. Denver was a blank page, and I was ready to start writing something new. Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. She wanted to call me, wanted to beg me for another chance. But what could she possibly say now? Nothing. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. She opened the door to see Franklin standing there, disheveled, exhausted. "Emily," he said, his voice rough. "What are you doing here?" She snapped. I thought we could talk." Her grip on the door tightened. "There's nothing to talk about. We destroyed everything." "Come on, Emily. Don't act like this was all me." Her eyes narrowed. "Leave." His face darkened. "Fine. But don't forget, you came to me first." She slammed the door in his face. And for the first time, Emily felt truly disgusted with herself. I stepped off the plane and into the crisp Denver air. The mountains stretched out in the distance, silent and steady. I took a deep breath. No past here. No memories. Just possibility. I rented a car and drove toward the mountains, letting the road unwind ahead of me. I didn't know where I was going. But for once, that was exactly the point. For the first time in years, I wasn't following a plan. And that felt like freedom. Back at school, Grace sat on her dorm bed, scrolling through her phone. Joan sat across the room, quiet. Neither of them had heard from Emily. Grace sighed. Should we call her? Joan shook her head. No, not yet. Grace stared at her phone. Do you think Dad's okay? Joan hesitated. I think he will be. Eventually. Grace nodded slowly. I hope so. They sat in silence, both wondering what their family would even look like now. One thing was certain, it would never be the same. I pulled off the road at a scenic overlook. I got out, the wind sharp against my face. The mountains stretched endlessly, snow dusting their peaks. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the cold air. And for the first time since that awful night, it didn't feel so heavy. I wasn't okay. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, I would be. The cold mountain air burned in my lungs as I stood at the edge of a scenic overlook, staring out at the endless stretch of the Rockies. The wind slapped against my face, but I welcomed it. It was real, raw and honest. Not like the dull, constant pain I'd been carrying since the night I walked into that bedroom and watched my life fall apart. For the first time in weeks, that crushing weight on my chest loosened just a little. This is why I came here. Not to run away, but to feel something different. To remind myself that the world was still moving, even if mine had come to a screeching halt. These mountains had been standing long before me, and they'd still be here long after. My problems didn't seem so massive out here. I took a long breath, letting the cold air settle in my chest, and closed my eyes. Now what? Back in Charlotte, Emily sat in the house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. The walls seemed to echo with silence, every corner a painful reminder of what we once had, and how she destroyed it. The divorce papers still sat on the coffee table, untouched since she signed them. She hadn't heard from me since the papers were delivered. Grace and Hannah kept their distance too. Their texts were polite, but cold, distant. But the worst part for Emily wasn't the silence. It was the loneliness. I was gone. Franklin was gone. And even her daughters felt like strangers now. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. It was a text from Hannah. Hannah, Mom, I hope you're okay, but we need space right now. Please respect that. Emily's hands trembled as she read it. She wanted to reply, to beg for forgiveness, but she knew that pushing them would only make it worse. Emily, I understand. I love you both. I'm here if you need me. She placed the phone back on the table and buried her face in her hands. The walls of that house seemed to close in tighter. I checked into a small mountain lodge that afternoon. It was tucked between towering pines, quiet and rustic. Exactly what I needed. The woman at the front desk, Marla, looked to be in her 60s. She handed me my room key with a kind smile. First time out here? She asked. I nodded. Needed a change of scenery. She chuckled. You're in the right place for that. We get all kinds passing through. People trying to disappear, others chasing something new. I gave a small smile. I guess I'm a bit of both. She tilted her head thoughtfully. Well, sometimes these mountains give you the answers you didn't even know you were looking for. Or at least enough quiet to think about it. I nodded slowly. That's what I'm hoping for. The days passed slowly, but I didn't mind. Mornings were spent hiking through icy trails, letting the cold air and the burn in my legs quiet my thoughts. That physical pain was honest. It wasn't like the mental weight I'd been dragging around. In the afternoons, I'd sit by the big window in the lodge's common room, nursing coffee and watching the snow drift down in slow, lazy flakes. That's where I met her. Mind if I sit here? I looked up. A woman stood by the table holding a mug of tea. She carried herself with this relaxed sort of confidence, wrapped in a thick sweater and jeans. Go ahead, I said, motioning to the empty seat. She sank into the chair with a quiet sigh. Long hike, she muttered, stretching her back. Yeah, I get that. She glanced at me. First time here? Yeah. You? Second. Came here a few years ago after my divorce. She smiled faintly. I guess I like punishing myself with cold weather and steep trails. I chuckled. Same. Minus the second time. She extended a hand. Leah. Max. For a moment, we just sat there in comfortable silence before she spoke again. Funny how people end up in places like this for the same reasons. I raised an eyebrow. And what reason is that? To figure out who they are when everything they thought they were is gone. Her words hit closer than I expected. Yeah, I said quietly. That sounds about right. Back in Charlotte, Emily sat in her car, parked outside the law office where the divorce papers had been filed. She wasn't sure why she was there. Maybe she thought being there would make it feel more real. She watched people come and go. None of them gave her a second glance. How did I get here? But she knew. Every lie, every excuse, every moment she chose Franklin over me. Emily pulled out her phone and stared at Grace's contact. Her finger hovered over the call button but didn't press it. They need space. Instead, she slid the phone back into her purse and started the car. It's time to figure out what's left of me. Over the next few days, Leah and I crossed paths more often. We'd share stories over coffee after long hikes. She never pried, and I appreciated that. Her divorce had been slow, quiet. Two people drifting apart. No cheating. No explosions. Just distance. I didn't give her many details. Just said my marriage ended recently, and it wasn't mutual. You're not the first man to come here running from something, Leah told me one afternoon. No, but it feels like I'm the only one carrying it like this. She gave me a knowing look. You won't always. One morning, I stood at the base of a trail Leah had suggested. She warned me it was steep, the kind of hike that forced you to focus on every breath, every step. Good, I thought. That's exactly what I need. The climb was brutal. By the time I reached the top, my legs were on fire, and my breath came in ragged gasps. But the view was something else. Snow-capped peaks stretched endlessly. The sky was so clear it felt like I could see forever. I sat on a rock and let it sink in. Up here, none of it mattered. Emily didn't matter. Franklin didn't matter. It was just me and the mountains. And for the first time, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could let go. Not today, but soon. Back in Charlotte, Emily boxed up some of my things. Not because I asked, but because she knew it was time. A shirt, a watch, a book I never finished. She packed them carefully, her hands trembling. Then she sat on the edge of the bed that wasn't ours anymore. Tears slid down her face. I did this, and now she had to live with it. I stood at the summit for a long time, letting the cold wind whip around me. Then I stood up, zipped my jacket, and started the climb back down, step by step, breath by breath, moving forward, because that's what I had to do. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I actually could.